Good morning. Good morning. It's Monday. Make it happen Monday. It's 9 a.m. So those of you new to the show, I'm Cheryl Andrews. I'm also known as the Listening Detective. And this show is all about setting you up for success by sharing stories, strategies, but also asking you questions to listen to your own system to find out what works for you. And today we're going to be concluding the 6-part series. It's all been about confidence. And we've been talking today about, what's likely to knock your confidence. So in the first one, we talked about what confidence was. We talked about decision making. We've talked about planning. We've talked about time. And right now, I can't remember what last week's episode was about, which normally might have knocked my confidence. But I recognize now that it's just part of the pattern of being human. And sometimes we recall information, sometimes we don't. And rather than seeing it as a reflection of my intelligence or my competence or my professionalism, I now just accept that that's part of being gorgeously human. I'm also aware, and I just want to check if anyone's live with me today. Good morning, someone's there. Could you just tell me if the screen is flickering for you, Paul? Because my screen on my laptop is flickering, and I'd hate this to be causing any problems for people with conditions like epilepsy or anything like that. So if there's a flicker on the screen, would you let me know, Paul? That would be great, because I just want to be able to put a warning on the notes if I can later. To make sure that it's okay for people. I realize I'm going to have to go through another bit of confidence cycle because I've Googled what I need to do, and apparently I need to download something, upload a driver and change something, and I'm sure I can do that. So good morning, Paul, and anyone else that joins me live. We're talking about the 3 things for me that primarily will result in me having my confidence knocked. It might be a lack of action. So if I've made a decision, nope, I have no flickering here and watching on the phone. Fabulous. That's good to know. I'll just ignore it on my end then. For me, is what will knock my, I'd love to know for you, Paul, what knocks your confidence? Because the 3 things for me are a lack of action, a lack of evidence, and a lack of feedback. And the evidence and feedback could be the same thing, and the action could be interpreted as feedback or evidence as well. But there's there's no kind of feedback or evidence or proof that what I'm doing is working. That would be the most likely thing for me that would knock my confidence. But over the years, what I've noticed is that when you pay attention to your own patterns, your own processes, that's my personal ones. But if you pay attention to your own, knowing yourself well, knowing how you do you, and recognizing, if you are comparing, another thing I see with clients is they lose confidence, is they compare themselves to somebody else. So recognizing maybe somebody has, like Paul, this amazing mind where he can just a little tiny flicker of their eye, or depending which way they look, or a twitch, he can tell whether what he has said is resonating with them or not. And he does his wonderful mind, and I don't do that. That isn't how I'm doing it. I'm reflecting back exactly what I'm seeing to the client, and my brain doesn't work the same as Paul's does. Now, there was a time that I would think that, the narrative I would be telling myself, i.e. the feedback I'd give myself, was because I was different and I didn't do it the same way as other people, there was something wrong with me. And that would then, I would lose my confidence. So for me, the big thing is the quality of the feedback I give myself, the story I tell myself. It's, am I tracking and collecting evidence of what is working? And the other thing is that I'm an action taker. So often when I'm in that limbo point where I actually can't take action because I don't have all the information to make the decision, I have had to learn that I can lose confidence when I can't take action. And actually being comfortable with uncomfortable means I stay confident because I know this part where I can't take action is part of the process, that there isn't anything wrong. It's just simply that I'm waiting for more information to arrive, whether I'm literally waiting for a sign from the universe or whether I'm waiting for to be able to find the information from somebody who's got to give me their side of the story or what they want in order that I can make my decision. Because the big thing that will stop me from taking action is I haven't decided. So learning about my decision-making model gave me that insight to do that. Paul's got, for me, feeling like I'm not worth not worth of the platform I've been asked to speak on. And so I guess that's the same thing that I've just said then. It's like, that's the narrative. So where does that come from? Is a question I'd love to know from you, Paul, if you're happy to share. Where's that narrative coming from? Where's that story? That's what I would call it. What is it that is that's driving that story? And even who's that come from? And that's why the first book I wrote is called Manage Your Critic from Overwhelm to Clarity, because ultimately the why in the clarity process is you, your story, and your why. It matters because the narrative you're telling yourself will inform how you feel today, and will inform what you think. But often what happens with the brain, and I'm sure that Paul can talk more to this with hypnotherapy, is that the brain doesn't really recognize time. And so things that happened in the past, it can bring very quickly to the present. And it only have to be, the smell of the stage or the lights, or something could trigger an emotional memory from like 20 years ago, but it forgets the 20 billion times that you've been on the stage and been absolutely awesome in between. So it's recognizing what your trigger could be. And I'd put that down to, the feedback. So whether it's a smell or it's something you see or something you hear, my one big one where I used to lose confidence all the time, my trigger point was people rolling their eyes or tutting. And when I tracked it back, it was, just a childhood thing that if my mum rolled her eyes with disappointment, as a young child when my brain was forming, obviously that was life-threatening that, I disappointed my parents. But, I realize now as an adult and having done a lot more personal development that rolling the eyes could be wind. It could be, they were like, oh God, yeah, she's right. That's a really good idea. Oh, how am I going to be able to do that? So the rolling the eyes isn't at me or my idea. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a great idea, but how am I going to implement it? And so I've learned that the rolling of the eyes can have so many different meanings, that me taking my definition of it was often resulting in me losing confidence. So actually learning to ask questions to understand what was happening for the other person gave me insights and understanding that actually my story, my narrative, the thing I was making up wasn't true. Now, regarding the tutting, what's interesting is I do know I'm quite sensitive to sound. So I am that person that if I'm lost, I have to turn the radio off. If I'm trying to think things through, if I'm trying to, I can have background talking and background music, but if I'm really struggling with a problem and I need quiet and I need things to be. So my husband, he has a habit of clicking his fingernails while we're watching telly. It's okay if I'm just watching telly. But if I decide to pick my crochet up and I'm having a bit of a problem with the pattern and he's making that clicky noise, it kind of like does that to my system. So it's just remembering that the key for me is not really me telling you my story, because those are really personal triggers to me. And I'm sure Paul will have his own triggers as well. So thinking about your own confidence, the thing I would advise you to do is pay attention to what happens just before. What happens just before you have that sense of losing confidence. And when you start to track it for yourself and you start to notice your patterns, and then you get curious about that trigger and you find out, where is that coming from? Quite often it might be that there was something that was quite traumatic in your life. And when we're 8-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 12-year-olds, bit disappointing the people who feed us and provide us with our safe haven, it is going to have a massive impact on us. But we as adults have the opportunity to update the data that our brain holds, and we can rewire the pathways and the signals that we give ourselves. And it may take time, and some people, you can use hypnotherapy, those kind of things. It may take time to let go of the old story, but becoming consciously aware of the story is the first step, and finding out what works and what doesn't work for you. Paul's got here, you're spot on. It's from being told I was right for something when I was a teenager. However, now I get asked to speak on some rather big things because they know I can do it. And I guess you and I have spoken about this before, Paul, it's that remembering, it's remembering, because when we were a teenager, and we're encouraged or discouraged. My daughter was told very young that she's really good at arguing, and they were like doing political debates. But she did take that to the other level at some point where she was really good at arguing, like everything was an argument. But because someone had given her the confidence to argue, she really does have the confidence now to argue both cases. But it did also go down the other road where she was arguing over everything because it was the thing that she was told she's really good at. So it's really being aware that what we're told when we're very young, whether it's good or bad or ugly, can influence who we are today. And I know lots of people avoid sort of doing therapy because they don't want to sort of think it's a waste of time talking about the past. And the thing is, if you have had something that's severely traumatic in the past, you don't want to relive it. You don't want to go over it. But with things like clean coaching is you don't have to go back over it. If you don't even care why it's happening. Some people like to have the answer to that, want to understand why. But if you understand that it's probably when your brain was still youngly forming, and therefore from a perspective point of view, if something happens, a minute or 2 minutes of your life when you're only a year old or 3 years old, those 2 or 3 minutes are a bigger portion of your life than they are right now as in your 30s, 40s, 50s. That you don't have to relive it, but what you can do is consciously become aware of the impact it's having on you today, and you can choose to decide what you'd like the impact to be, and you could choose a new response. And then, like any other habit, you develop the ability. And often for me is I have to take action. I then need to collect evidence of what's worked. And sometimes I need to just change the way I give myself feedback. But other times I actually need people around me. I need my cheerleaders who are catching me getting it right. Because there is something psychologically that changes in my system when I hear it externally versus just going, show you've got this, you're okay, yeah, I've got it. When I hear it from somebody else, it makes a massive difference. And I think that as adults, perhaps we think that it's a bit needy to need to hear it externally, but we hear it differently. There's psychologically, there's a video I'll have to see if I can find and put it in the comments later. But there's a woman that talks about your inner voice, and actually we don't hear our own voice because as we speak, it sort of travels through our jawbone, and that is the vibration that we hear. So often when we hear ourselves on an audio or a video, it's like, oh my God, do I sound like that? Because that's not how we hear ourselves. But also the other thing to bear in mind is that when we're speaking, quite often when we talk as humans, particularly if we're repeating an old pattern and a story of woe is me and this isn't right and this is really difficult and who am I to do this kind of job, or whatever you're talking about, if your brain has already heard it before, it doesn't bother listening because it's like, well, I've heard that before. I'm sure if you've had a friend you're listening to and they're repeating the same story, first time you're like, yeah, second time you're already sort of guessing what's going to come because you've heard that bit before. Third time, yeah, they're repeating themselves. And the more times you're hearing the same thing, once your brain thinks, oh, I've got that, which is what we do when we're trying to learn, once you think you've got it, it stops trying to listen because it's already worked out that it can save energy by not doing that. And the challenge we have as humans is that our brain often does that with ourselves. So we can be busy moaning or telling other people about stuff. But if we're not actually listening to what we're saying, and we're not noticing whether the story is one that's serving us to feel more confident and to have more clarity, or whether the story is one that's actually impacting our confidence and actually taking it, knocking it away, reducing it, whichever word works for you, then we're not consciously aware of how we can do something about that. And so the reason clean language as a coaching technique really worked for me personally is because the facilitator, so when I work with clients, it's me, but when I have a facilitator working with me, I speak and they repeat my words back. And it means that I get to hear my actual words. And because it's with somebody else's voice and somebody else's tone and somebody else's pace, of course, my brain pays attention now because it sounds like it's something different. And therefore, I can hear my own words and my own thoughts and get a fresh perspective, get a fresh insight into it. Because if they are things I've been saying or thinking for a long time and I've become unconsciously aware that I'm doing it, then I don't have a lot of choice about what I change. And so one of the things to think about is, what works for you? What happened when you've lost your confidence and you've got confidence? What happens in between? And for me, I do know it is about hearing something that says, things are going well. I had a conversation just this weekend with my husband. I was going, but I was downloading about some stuff, and we were trying to get some stuff sorted out about our will, and we both had a bit of sort of different opinion. And I said to him, I just need to hear that X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to go into our personal stuff there, but I just need to hear you say it. And he went, and I went, no, I actually need to hear you repeat those words, because I really needed to hear it outside for my system to feel comforted and to have confidence that I'd been heard, that he was understanding which part of this conversation was the most important part for me. So that's what I know my system needs. By getting to know your own system, you can ask for those needs to be met as well. So another thing that I wrote down, because I wrote down 4 things this morning. 3 were, for me, I lose if there's not enough action, if there's not the evidence, and I don't get feedback, I can lose confidence. And so now I know that about myself, I can go, right, okay, so what action can I take? What evidence is there that things are working? And where could the feedback come from? And sometimes the feedback can just come from me, that actually this is okay. But what I also know is that change can evoke all sorts of emotions, and understanding that when change happens, there's often, real joyful and excitement about the possibilities and the opportunities if it's change that you really want. But equally, when it's change you didn't really want, so maybe you hear some sad news, or you have a bereavement, there is going to be, in any change cycle, some element of letting go or losing something. And so we are going to have emotions that may involve sadness, or feeling a bit fed up, or it may even be depressed. And what I've learned over the years is the more that you understand your processes and you understand your models, then when it happens, it doesn't become something that's frightening, and you don't lose confidence in yourself or the thing that you're going for, because you just know it's part of the process. So today, for example, I woke up and I really felt flat. In fact, until about 30 seconds before I started talking live today, I was just like, don't want to be here. I mean, not here as in like don't want to be here as in like, life, but don't want to be at my desk working yet. And I know that's because that I have supported certain people over the last sort of 10 days or so. And over the weekend, when I suddenly paused and I had a bit of time for the emotions to fill up, I found myself quite teary. And I was okay with that, because some of the things I've heard are incredibly sad. And some of them are people that are very close to me. And there is absolutely nothing I can do other than listen. I can't take action. Okay. There are things that happened a long time ago. There's things that, Mark's a really good friend passed away. There's nothing I can do to make things better or right. And so because my driver for feeling confident is action, but what I can do is just be with those emotions, acknowledge that's how I'm feeling, allow them to be heard, allow them to be witnessed. And I don't then see this as me losing confidence or even losing the ability to get on here and do videos and run my business and get on with stuff today. But if I don't give them that moment, what can happen is I spend a lot of energy pushing them down, pushing them away, trying to be positive when I feel pants. And actually, for me, confidence comes from having clarity of what I want, having confidence in the process, and understanding that some change is uncomfortable. And although I won't dwell in that at that time, it is important that I acknowledge. So even as I've talked to you now, what I've kind of realized, and I hadn't really sort of twigged that until just talking out loud with you, and I've just caught myself saying it, is there's 3 or 4 people in my life right now where things have happened or are happening, and I'm helpless to do anything to help them. And because I'm an action taker and a doer, that can make me feel quite uncomfortable. And so therefore, it's just be okay with it. Okay, well, you're in that space right now where you can't take action. So get comfortable with uncomfortable, Cheryl, because this too will pass. And because I know that's the process, and I know this won't last forever, and it was just a moment in time, I can be confident, even though I'm not full of like absolutely ecstatically joyful about doing things. I'm like, okay, just take one step at a time, do what you can. Well, I hope that's useful. I'm not sure if you're still with us, Paul, because you were talking away, and on mine it said there's nobody live, which is very rude. That brings me to the end of today's Make It Monday. As always, I want you to invite you to think about, what do you know now about what knocks your confidence, and what difference does knowing that make? And given what you know now, what would you like to have happen? Because it's all really great spending time listening to people like me and reading stuff on social media and Googling and researching. But what can happen is we end up with more and more options, more and more choices, and we don't actually consciously stop and think, what would we like to have happen? And I know certainly for me, as a result of just catching myself that I'm feeling helpless, it's what I'd like to have happen is to notice that, oh, I have been there to listen. So I have done something, and that I am taking action. I'm also just going to just acknowledge that it's really sad, the stuff that's happening. It is sad. That's what I'd like to have happen, is to acknowledge that the thing I can do is listen, and that is helpful, and that I can support these people through the change that they're going through right now. But also just acknowledge that, what is happening is sad, and that's what I'd like to have happen. What about you? What would you like to have happen? And for that to happen, how do you need to be? And if I think about that today, I guess I do need to be self-assured and confident that that I've created the conditions that people can ask for what they need, and that I can ask questions, and that I can provide the resource and support that is resourceful and helpful to them. And that to be okay as well, that sometimes they may not even want me to listen. They might just need time on their own. They might need space. So how I need to be is confident with the process. Yeah, so that's mine. That's where that sort of comes from for me. What about you? I'd love to hear from you. And for you to be confident, or in my case, be confident, for you to be however you need to be, and for you to have whatever you want to have, what kind of resource or support might you need? I'm just going to think about that. What kind of resource and support do I need? What I need to do is just spend 5 or 10 minutes now before my call at 10 o'clock, and actually just write down. I just need space and time to write down what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and just allow it to come out of my system, to acknowledge where I'm at, and then set myself up for success for the week, because I've got some amazing clients to work with this week. So there's nothing to be sad about there. I've got some great stuff to be part of this week, and that's the joy of life, isn't it? That we've got this wonderful stuff going on, and also sad stuff all at the same time, and that we are wonderfully human, and we're going through these range of emotions. So my resource and support will be some time just to sit with what I'm thinking and feeling before I get into my next call, because I hadn't quite realized that's how I was feeling until I started talking out loud to you. What about you? For you to have what you want, and for you to be how you need to be, what kind of resource and support might you need? And as always, if you're feeling like everything always falls on your shoulders and nobody can help you, it's just down to you. It may well be that all you need is someone to really listen, so that you can clarify your thoughts, and then you can decide what you're going to prioritize, what you're going to take action on, what you're going to let go of or ditch, what you're going to park. And sometimes, it may well be that the action taking, the doing, does have to come down to you. But the support that you might need is just to be listened to just take the edge off feeling quite so alone. So you've got some support and resource as you make those decisions and you take action. And more importantly, as change happens, you've got someone to celebrate it with. Then please do keep me in mind. That's Cheryl Andrews, also known as the Listening Detective. And in my strapline when I'm out networking is for a different perspective, called the Listening Detective. Have a fantastic week, everybody. Look forward to seeing you all again next Monday. The next season, we're going to be talking all about change. So let me know what's changing in your life, or what you'd like to know about how to manage change better, and I will look forward to sharing my strategies that my clients have come up with, but also myself, over the next 6 weeks. Have fun. Speak to you soon.